Hey everyone, welcome back to MangaMinute. I'm thrilled to share my latest recap video with you. If you missed the previous one, no worries, just take a quick peek in the description below for the link. Now, let's dive right in and enjoy.
The dark cloud of grief descended upon Du Yugong far sooner than he had anticipated. His father's condition, which had been steadily deteriorating, took a sudden and drastic turn for the worse. He had planned to present his father with his resignation letter, a carefully written declaration of his desire to step down as the successor of the demonic cult's leadership. He had envisioned a conversation where he would seek his father's permission to pursue a long-held dream, a quiet, peaceful life, far removed from the power struggles and bloody legacies of the cult. But now that vision had shattered. The opportunity to speak those words to his father, to see the reaction on his face, was ripped away by the cruel hands of fate. Du Yugong holding his father's photograph, his eyes hollow and unfocused, consumed by the weight of his grief. How did it come to this? He couldn't stop the haunting question from echoing in his mind. Just days earlier, he had learned of his father's illness and had rushed to the leader's quarters, disbelief and dread gripping his heart. Upon his arrival, the air inside the room had been thick with the scent of medicinal herbs, a futile attempt to stave off the inevitable. The physician had been there, his face a mask of grim resignation as he explained the situation. The internal injuries that the heavenly Demon Asura had sustained during the brutal battle at Mount Bong had worsened, their effects now beyond any cure or remedy. The words had cut through Du Yugong like a blade. His father, a figure of immense power who had seemed almost invincible, was now succumbing to the damage that had been inflicted upon him. When the heavenly Demon Asura saw his son standing there, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, fear, and sorrow, he summoned what little strength he had left. His voice, once so commanding, had become a frail whisper, each word a laborious effort. He had called out to Du Yugong, acknowledging his presence, his tone strained and trembling with the weight of his suffering. In that moment, Du Yugong felt his breath catch in his throat, his mind reeling at the sight of his father's weakened state. This was not the man he had known, the powerful leader who had commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He had wanted to tell his father to save his strength, to not speak, to cling to whatever life remained. But the heavenly Demon Asura had refused to be silent. Raising a trembling hand, he had fixed his eyes on Du Yugong and, with great effort, began to speak. Each word seemed to drain the life out of him, yet his resolve did not waver. He had imparted his final command. Du Yugong would become the leader of the demonic cult. It was a declaration, an irrevocable passing of the torch, a destiny that Du Yugong had dreaded but could no longer escape. As soon as the message was delivered, the last ounce of strength left the heavenly Demon Asura. His hand fell, his eyes closed, and the breath he had been holding slipped away in a final, shuddering exhale. The room plunged into a profound silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of Du Yugong as he stood there, frozen in the aftermath. He had not been ready. There had been no time to prepare, no chance to say all the things he had wanted to say. His father was gone, leaving him with the heavy mantle of leadership and 1,000 unanswered questions. Du Yugong stormed into his room, his thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and resignation. The weight of his father's final command bore down on him heavily. The reality of his fate settled like an iron chain around his heart. He could no longer avoid becoming the cult leader. His long-held desire for a peaceful life was now nothing more than a distant dream, crushed beneath the expectations and responsibilities that had been forced upon him. As he crossed the threshold into his quarters, a chill ran down his spine. Something felt off, a subtle shift in the air that set his senses on edge. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. There was an unfamiliar presence lurking in the shadows. This was not a place where others dared to intrude, especially now, with the cult leader's death so fresh. Yet, here was an intruder, calm and unfazed, standing within the private sanctuary of his room. Du Yugong's voice cut through the silence, demanding to know the identity of this intruder. But before he could finish his question, the stranger moved. It was a blur of motion, faster than anything Du Yugong had ever witnessed. In the blink of an eye, the figure was upon him, pressing against his pressure points with a precision that left him utterly immobilized. Shock washed over him, his body betraying him as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. When had this person moved? How had they bypassed his defenses so easily? His mind raced, but his body refused to respond. The stranger, still holding him in a vice-like grip, spoke with an eerie calmness. There was no malice in the voice, only a cold detachment that sent a shiver down Du Yugong's spine. Helpless and unable to move, he could only watch as his assailant effortlessly lifted him. His world blurred as the intruder carried him out of the room, leaving behind the shadows and silence of his quarters. He had been taken, with no chance to resist, his fate now in the hands of this unknown figure. Du Yugong was dragged from his safe haven quarter, his body limp and unresponsive. His mind raced, desperately trying to find a way out of this dire situation. The stranger's swift attack had rendered him powerless, his pressure points expertly blocked. He could feel the faint stirrings of panic clawing at him. He needed to call for help, to alert the cult to his predicament before it was too late. Yet, with his body immobilized, even that seemed like an impossible feat. Suddenly, the echo of hurried footsteps reached his ears. Dozens of figures surged into view behind them, their forms barely visible in the darkness. For a brief moment, a flicker of hope ignited within him. The Red Ghost Squad and the Yacha Soul Pursuit Squad, elite warriors of the demonic cult, had arrived. If anyone could rescue him from this unknown assailant, it would be them. Relief washed over him as he saw their familiar insignias glinting in the torchlight. They were his father's loyal forces, and they would surely eliminate the intruder. But then the hope shattered. Instead of the cries of rescue, a chilling command rang out. The warriors of the demonic cult called not for his safety but for his death. Their eyes, once loyal, now burned with a fierce intent to kill. They had not come to save him. They had come to end him. The words cut through Du Yugong like a blade. There was a reward for his head. The next leader of the demonic cult was now a target, and his captors were now his executioners. In a frenzy, the cult members swarmed towards Du Yugong and the stranger. It was a stampede of hostility and betrayal, their intention unmistakable. The decree was absolute: the elimination of Du Yugong and the one who had taken him. Surrounded by the warriors of the demonic cult, the man who had taken Du Yugong, later known as Poong Cheon, stood resolute. With a steely glint in his eyes, he unsheathed his sword, its blade gleaming coldly in the moonlight. Without hesitation, he moved with a speed and precision that left the gathered assassins bewildered. In a matter of moments, those who had rushed forward to claim Du Yugong's life found themselves cut down. Their attacks deflected and their lives ended with ruthless efficiency. Poong Cheon moved like a tempest, his every strike calculated and deadly, leaving Du Yugong in stunned disbelief. Du Yugong watched in shock, unable to comprehend how his father's elite forces could fall so easily. These were seasoned warriors, feared throughout the cult for their strength and skill. Yet, before this lone swordsman, they crumpled as if they were nothing more than mere novices. The gap in power was staggering, and for a brief moment, Du Yugong felt the stirrings of hope mixed with an unsettling sense of vulnerability. This man, Poong Cheon, had not only kidnapped him but was now fighting to protect him with a ferocity that defied all logic. The leader of the Red Ghost Squad, Yumsun Sosung, gritted his teeth at the sight of his fallen men. His voice rang out sharply, a mixture of anger and desperation. He barked orders, rallying his remaining forces to overwhelm Poong Cheon with sheer numbers. It was a desperate bid to regain control of the situation, to prevent Du Yugong's escape. However, before they could make their move, an authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Samyeonmagun, the smiling elder, appeared with an eerie calmness that immediately silenced the battlefield. His presence commanded respect, and his words held the weight of finality. Yumsun Sosung's protest was immediate, his frustration palpable. He knew the implications of allowing Du Yugong to escape and feared the consequences that would follow. Bulpyeong Koyaung, the leader of the Yacha Soul Pursuit Squad, echoed the urgency, his voice edged with impatience. They believed they could still catch up and finish the task they had been set upon. But Samyeonmagun's demeanor remained unshaken. He spoke with a calm certainty, revealing that the cult's very future hinged on their actions. The heavenly Demon Asura had foreseen this scenario and made arrangements that would protect Du Yugong, even in death. Poong Cheon, now revealed as Du Yugong's personal guard, was a force they could not easily counter. To pursue and kill Du Yugong now would bring about a great disaster upon the cult, a calamity that the heavenly Demon Asura had warned against. With an air of finality, Samyeonmagun declared that he had already ensured Du Yugong could not escape his fate within the cult. There was no need for further pursuit, at least not yet. He ordered the gathered forces to dispose of the bodies of the fallen and to summon the elders. The ceremony for the 16th cult leader would now commence. Dragged along for what felt like an eternity, Du Yugong could barely contain his frustration. His body remained immobilized, his pressure points still blocked by Poong Cheon's precise techniques. The sun had risen and set, marking the passage of an entire day since his abduction. Anger simmered within him, boiling over into a demand for answers. How could this man, whoever he was, presume to take such actions against him? Yet, his words fell on seemingly indifferent ears. Poong Cheon continued his relentless pace, showing no intention of explaining himself or his motives. As they approached the outskirts of Seongjin, Poong Cheon finally halted. His expression remained stoic, unyielding as he turned toward Du Yugong. With a swift motion, he released the pressure points that had kept Du Yugong in a state of helplessness. The sudden rush of energy and mobility surged through Du Yugong's limbs, and he staggered, momentarily unsteady from the abrupt return of control. Relief washed over him. He was free from his paralysis at last. Before Du Yugong could gather his thoughts, Poong Cheon dropped to his knees before him. The act was swift and reverent, catching Du Yugong off guard. In a voice filled with unwavering loyalty, Poong Cheon introduced himself, proclaiming his sole purpose, to serve the cult leader. Du Yugong's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Created to serve him? The implications of those words resonated with an eerie clarity. Had his father orchestrated this? Had the heavenly Demon Asura groomed this warrior solely for the purpose of ensuring Du Yugong's survival and leadership? His father's machinations suddenly loomed over him like a shadow. The notion that Poong Cheon was more than a mere follower, that he was a creation born from his father's will, left Du Yugong with a profound unease. The meticulous planning that had gone into his protection was evident now, even after his father's death. But questions burned within him, none more pressing than the matter of the rebellion that had swept through the cult. His voice, edged with curiosity and suspicion, demanded the truth. Was Samyeonmagun, the elder who had halted the pursuit, the mastermind behind the current insurrection within the cult? Poong Cheon's answer came without hesitation, confirming Du Yugong's suspicions. Yes, it was Samyeonmagun. The elder's calm demeanor and strategic mind had concealed a treacherous ambition, one that sought to challenge the very foundations of the cult's hierarchy. Du Yugong absorbed the revelation with a murmur, his eyes narrowing as he processed the betrayal. Samyeonmagun, once a trusted ally, had turned against him. The sting of treachery was undeniable, yet instead of anger or sorrow, a strange exhilaration flickered across Du Yugong's face. An excited smirk twisted his lips as he considered the implications. If Samyeonmagun sought the position of cult leader so fervently, this might be his chance to abandon the heavy mantle of leadership he never wanted. The thought of stepping down, of finally embracing the peaceful life he had longed for, thrilled him. It was as if fate had offered him a perfect escape from the life that had been thrust upon him. However, a shadow of concern quickly crossed his face as he glanced at Poong Cheon. This man, fiercely loyal and seemingly unshakable in his devotion, stood as an obstacle to Du Yugong's newfound plan. Poong Cheon was not someone who could be easily dismissed or ignored. No, he would have to deal with this problem delicately. Ensure that Poong Cheon could be sent on his way without disrupting the life of tranquility that Du Yugong envisioned. His mind worked rapidly, formulating a way to distance himself from this unwanted guardian. Gathering his resolve, Du Yugong spoke with an air of authority, attempting to dismiss Poong Cheon. His words were direct and firm, declaring that the true leader of the cult was now Samyeonmagun. He ordered Poong Cheon to leave, suggesting that his loyalty had been misplaced. But Poong Cheon remained unmoved. His expression was unyielding, his posture stiff with determination. He responded with a declaration that only two people commanded his loyalty: the heavenly Demon Asura and Du Yugong himself. The idea of following anyone else was anathema to him, and he expressed his willingness to die rather than betray this loyalty. Du Yugong observed Poong Cheon's rigid stance and the unwavering intensity in his eyes. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a single-minded devotion that bordered on fanaticism. This man would not be swayed by words or logic. Poong Cheon's resolve was such that he would rather harm himself than disobey his master's command. It was clear that dismissing him would not be as simple as ordering him away. Trying to take control of the situation, Du Yugong attempted to assert his authority, criticizing Poong Cheon for calling him cult leader, yet refusing to obey his orders. Before he could finish, Poong Cheon acted. With a swift motion, he approached the cliff at Du Yugong's back and, without a second's hesitation, began to bang his head against the rock face. Du Yugong watched in disbelief as Poong Cheon continued to injure himself, his voice a lamentation for his perceived failure. He was punishing himself for defying the commands of his lord, and he intended to continue this self-inflicted retribution until Du Yugong commanded him to stop. Shock turned to exasperation as Du Yugong shouted at Poong Cheon to cease his actions. The absurdity of the situation left him at a loss for words. Here he was, standing in the dead of night, watching a man batter himself against a cliffside because he refused to accept that his loyalty was unwanted. With a tone of irritation mixed with a hint of desperation, Du Yugong finally issued the order for Poong Cheon to stop, asserting his authority as the cult leader to put an end to this madness. Poong Cheon obeyed instantly, his movements halting as he stepped back from the cliff. Du Yugong gazed at Poong Cheon, a mix of disbelief and exasperation swirling within him. This man, this strange bodyguard, was proving to be more bewildering with each passing moment. A sigh escaped his lips as he pondered what kind of person his father had raised in secret. The unwavering loyalty was one thing, but the sheer peculiarity of Poong Cheon's behavior was another. What on earth had the heavenly Demon Asura been thinking when he groomed this individual? Resigned to his current circumstances, Du Yugong decided they needed to find shelter. It was late, and the idea of spending the night in the mountains didn't appeal to him in the slightest. His mind turned to more practical concerns, like money. Surely, his father had provided Poong Cheon with funds to ensure his comfort during their journey. But as he inquired about their finances, he was met with an unexpected and unsettling truth. Poong Cheon, standing there with his usual unperturbed demeanor, informed him that he had no money whatsoever. Not a single coin. The cold reality struck Du Yugong. They were to spend the night in the wilderness. Shock flashed across Du Yugong's face. He had expected some semblance of preparedness from this supposed protector. The idea that this was Poong Cheon's version of serving him left him speechless for a moment. What kind of service was this if they were to sleep under the open sky like common vagrants? His voice rose in frustration, challenging Poong Cheon's notion of loyalty and protection. Was this really what his father had envisioned for him? Poong Cheon, unfazed by the outburst, simply bowed deeply in apology. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if this kind of situation was nothing out of the ordinary. Despite his earlier admission, Poong Cheon assured Du Yugong that there was, in fact, a place where they could rest, a place with food and shelter. His eyes shifted toward the shadows at the edge of their path, drawing Du Yugong's attention to a group of men approaching them. These men had been waiting for them, their intentions clear and hostile. The atmosphere grew tense as the bandit gang surrounded Du Yugong and Poong Cheon. The leader of the bandits, his eyes cold and menacing, made it clear that they had ventured into the territory of the Green Forest gang. His voice, low and threatening, promised no mercy. It was a warning, a declaration that the two would not leave this forest alive. Du Yugong quickly assessed the situation. The aura emanating from these men was unmistakable. They were the elites of the notorious Green Forest gang. This was no time for bravado or defiance. Realizing the gravity of their predicament, he decided that the best course of action was to apologize and defuse the situation. His mind raced, searching for the right words to express regret and appease their aggressors. Yet, before he could open his mouth, Poong Cheon stepped forward, his voice ringing out with unwavering confidence. The man, always loyal to a fault, demanded silence from the bandits. He sought to assert Du Yugong's status, challenging the bandits to recognize who they were dealing with. Panic flickered in Du Yugong's eyes as he felt the situation spiral out of control. This was not the time for displays of pride. He needed Poong Cheon to stand down, to understand that their lives depended on a more tactful approach. Du Yugong muttered urgently under his breath, urging Poong Cheon to apologize and follow his lead. But his plea fell on deaf ears. Poong Cheon's unyielding resolve only seemed to provoke the bandits further. The leader of the gang, infuriated by the perceived arrogance of these two intruders, barked out a command. With a roar, the bandits launched a coordinated assault, their weapons glinting menacingly as they closed in on Du Yugong and Poong Cheon. Poong Cheon, however, was already moving. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, the blade sliding free with a metallic hiss. He met the oncoming wave of bandits with a single, defiant cry, his voice echoing through the trees. His sword arm moved in a blur, a deadly dance of steel that cut through the air with terrifying precision. In an instant, the combined attack of the bandits was neutralized, their weapons clattering uselessly to the ground. Poong Cheon's skill was unmatched, and his swordsmanship, honed to perfection, was far beyond what these forest bandits could contend with. Du Yugong stood back, his eyes wide with shock and a hint of disbelief. He had intended to handle the situation with caution, to avoid conflict at all costs. Yet here they were, in the midst of chaos, all because of Poong Cheon's refusal to back down. As the clash between Poong Cheon and the bandits reached its climax, the bandit leader's eyes widened in recognition. The impressive display of Poong Cheon's swordsmanship, a perfect barrier of steel, indicated that he was no ordinary opponent. The realization dawned on the leader that he was facing someone formidable, far beyond the typical bandit he was accustomed to. The leader's mind raced, calculating his next move. He swiftly ordered his men to retreat, hoping to escape before the situation deteriorated further. But before he could fully convey the command, Poong Cheon appeared behind him with an unsettling calmness. The suddenness of Poong Cheon's presence was unnerving, a stark reminder of the danger they faced. With a grim expression, Poong Cheon made his intentions clear. In one fluid, ruthless motion, he twisted the bandit leader's neck with a forceful turn, achieving a chilling 180-degree rotation. The leader's body slumped, his eyes wide with shock, but he remained upright. Du Yugong, witnessing the scene unfold, was overtaken by a surge of panic and desperation. He rushed forward, exclaiming in a mix of horror and frustration, demanding that Poong Cheon stop the senseless violence. His voice was laced with an urgent plea, hoping to prevent further bloodshed. Poong Cheon, unmoved by the outburst, calmly reassured Du Yugong. He explained that the bandit leader was not dead, merely incapacitated. Despite the horrifying appearance of the leader's twisted neck, Poong Cheon insisted that the man was still alive. Turning to the bandit leader, he issued a stern command, instructing him to guide them to the green forest promptly. The absurdity of the situation hit Du Yugong like a cold wave. He stared at Poong Cheon, his mind reeling with disbelief. The unsettling combination of Poong Cheon's ruthless efficiency and the bizarrely intact bandit leader left Du Yugong feeling as if he had been thrust into a nightmarish scenario. He could only lament his fate, recognizing that his current companion was not only dangerous but also unpredictably unhinged. At the base of the Green Forest Gang, the Han Baekseojian stronghold, Poong Cheon stormed through the entrance with a decisive kick. The heavy door crashed open, revealing the interior of the stronghold. As Poong Cheon stepped inside, he immediately surveyed the surroundings, his expression one of clear discontent. His gaze swept across the crude, makeshift accommodations, and he muttered in a disdainful tone. The conditions were far below his expectations, reminiscent of a dismal stable rather than a formidable base of operations. Du Yugong, following closely behind, could only watch in embarrassment as Poong Cheon's criticism cut through the air. He scolded his bodyguard, dismayed by the lack of decorum. Poong Cheon, ever the loyal servant, quickly lowered his head in apology, acknowledging his mistake with a deep bow. The commotion drew the attention of the inhabitants of the stronghold. An authoritative voice broke the silence, taking offense at Poong Cheon's bold remarks. The speaker's tone was one of both surprise and challenge, their patience clearly worn thin by the uninvited guests. Du Yugong, trying to defuse the situation, stepped forward to offer an apology for the intrusion. His words faltered as his gaze fell upon an unexpected figure. His eyes widened with astonishment as he took in the sight of a woman who seemed almost otherworldly in her grace and elegance. The delicate beauty of the woman was striking against the rough backdrop of the stronghold, and Du Yugong's mind raced with the realization that such a refined lady might be held captive. A rush of concern flooded him, The stark juxtaposition between her refined grace and the harsh environment led him to fear that she might be held captive against her will. His instincts urged him to act. He whispered urgently to Poong Cheon, directing him to take action and rescue the enigmatic woman from what he presumed to be a dire situation. The woman, undeterred by the unexpected entrance and the scrutiny of the intruders, approached them with a serene smile. Her greeting, though initially warm, was tainted with a sharp edge as she questioned the identity and origins of the intruders. Her demeanor combined grace with a steely resolve, making it clear that she was not merely a passive presence in the stronghold.